Hello and welcome. Today is Monday, the 29th of April 2019, and the weather forecast here in Victoria Island is 29 degrees, while in Lagos in general, it will be at the highest 31 degrees, while the lowest today will be 27 degrees. So as always, remember to stay hydrated. I'm Tokunbo Taiwo, and this is Off the Press. With me this morning to discuss the major headlines on the dailies is a public affairs analyst, Martins Lomba. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. How was your weekend?
Well, lovely.
Lovely?
Yes,
and
lovely.
Traffic getting here, was it, some people have already complained?
I came in early.
Okay.
I came in early, so it was smooth.
Okay, good. All right, so we've got a number of papers today. We've got This Day, we've got The Punch, we've got The Nation, we've got Vanguard. So we've got quite a number of newspapers. We'll start with The Punch and we'll just go through what the major stories are before we delve deep into at least the major headline. Okay, we'll start at the top of The Punch. We've got Lagos, Rivers, Ogun, Delta made 2.71 trillion naira IGR in 5 years. That story is on page 37. And underneath that main headline at the top of The Punch newspaper, we've got on the left-hand side, poisonous Ponmo in Lagos market. Health Ministry warns. 3 suspects have been arrested by the government in regards to that. That story is on page 10. And next to that story on the right-hand side at the top of the Punch newspapers, we have EFCC presses fresh charges against Bauchi governor-elect. That story is on page 12. Let's look at the middle of the Punch with the major headline. We've got 30,000 naira minimum wage. NLC chapters set to write governance on implementation. There's a rider underneath that story with Ekiti Labour to meet government on the 1st of May. The full details are available on page 2. Okay, at the bottom of the newspaper of The Punch, we've got in the left-hand side, in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got 10 die in Ogun, Edo multiple crashes, page 4. And in the middle there, brutalized punchman, last man withdraws power drunk officials from duty and invites victim, pages 4 and 5. And on the right-hand side, in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got state police, not solution to banditry, ACF. That story is on page 12. Let's have a look at the back cover of The Punch before we even look at the major headlines. Is the usual article and the usual column by Henry Boyo. This time he's talking about inflation, the invisible arch terrorist. Yes, for if you want to find out more about that, you can grab a copy of The Punch. Okay, so back to the front page of The Punch, the major headline, 30,000 naira minimum wage. NLC chapters set to write governors on implementation. Let me start with your initial reaction, because 30 more minimum wage, we've been talking about this in like forever, the last week and the week beforehand. What's your initial reaction to this?
30,000 in the real sense is not a fantastic amount to pay anybody, given the kind of inflationary pressure that we have in Nigeria today. However, it is likely, when implemented, it is likely to compound the situation. And we need to be very careful about how we make demands, to solve economic problems. The truth is that at some point, if we're not careful, things will become much more complex, and at the end of the day, most of us Nigerians will be poorer, for it. So to that extent, we needed to have really sat down and taken an economic review as to how the relationships, demand and supply relationships, labor force relationships with employers, these are very important parameters that we ought to have taken cognizance of. It's not just about 30,000. Simply put, when you have 30,000 naira, as your income, and for some reason you cannot afford some of the things that you used to afford when you had 18,000 naira, the question is, are you better off? To my mind, you're not really better off. So I think that as a country, we ought to have really sat down and reviewed some of these economic variables in such a way that the net effect will be that people are better off.
Okay, let's look at it from the person actually earning this minimum wage.
Yes.
They were initially earning 18,000, now they're getting 30,000, and you're talking about the economic forces at hand,
Yes.
Do you not think by any chance that in as much as it's not a high figure, they would still be thankful that, okay, this is almost twice the figure that they were earning in the first place?
Yes, I agree with you. But like I said, in a twinkle of an eye, we're likely to see all of the 30,000 swallowed up probably faster than when it was 18,000. I've had the argument where a man was complaining to the wife that, for goodness sake, why would you serve me a piece of meat? And the wife said, oh, darling, I'm so sorry, I forgot to share it in two. Meaning that all the while he was having two pieces of meat, it was always one piece of meat, but the wife had cleverly been sharing it. There are people you give 500 naira notes, maybe two of it, and they're like, oh, ain't try, But if you give them 1,000, it's like, it's a single note. So these things are neither here nor there. The reality for me is that as an economic model, subsidy actually works better for the economy than rise in wages. That is my understanding.
Okay, and I don't know, people have had different opinions regarding this 30,000 minimum wage. Some are of the view that it will actually cause inflation. Some are of the view that it won't. What's your own take?
The reality for our system, Nigeria, there are so many things that are peculiar to Nigeria. Even before the 30,000 minimum wage is implemented, the mere fact that there is news everywhere about 30,000 naira minimum wage, I can tell you that a number of these economic forces are on the rise. So at the end of the day, we really don't benefit. With the people that we're trying to help actually suffer. If there is free education, for instance, the poor man doesn't really need to think about making savings or looking for some extra means of earning money to send the child to school. If there is free health care, if there is some welfare program, I'm not talking about trader money. Are you with me? So these are the things that help an economy to actually mature. That is the kind of economic model that I think we need to implement in Nigeria.
Okay, what I was asking basically was, if you think as a result of the 30,000 minimum wage, do you think as a result the inflation will kick in and will it rise?
Oh, certainly.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hone in. Okay, because of time, I would have loved for us to discuss in detail, but because of time, let's quickly move on to our next newspaper. We've got This Day newspaper, and like I always do, I like to start at the very top and work my way down. We've got at the top of the newspaper, 2 years after CBN, analysts count gains of I&E window. The story is detailed on page 8. And just underneath that headline, we've got power generation rises by 349 megawatts after gas supply disruption. That story is on page 9. The main headline for This Day newspapers is a race for Senate presidency intensifies. Lawan resolves to meet Ndume Goje. There's also a rider underneath that to checkmate PDP's plan to determine Senate-led leadership. Okay, at the bottom of This Day newspaper, we've got on the left-hand side, INEC PDP bicker over compliance with appeal court order. That story is also on page 8. And at the bottom, we've got again FG and ASU fight over IPPIS on page 8. Let's see what's available on the back. It's the usual columns once again. Femi Falana, guest column, is making a people's constitution. He comments on that. Okay, so back to the front page of This Day newspapers. Let's start with the major headline once again. Race for Senate presidency intensifies.
Politicians are good at their game. The APC, the PDP, definitely were going to have a repeat of the 2015 scenario. Reason being that this APC of a party, they have different blocks and different interests within that party. So PDP is likely to work with any of the dissident factions within the APC and produce the Senate President and Speaker. To that extent, chances are that APC might not get you know, the Senate presidency as they are anticipating, unless of course they do negotiate and come down from their high horse. Anything outside of that, it will still be a replay of the 2015 scenario.
Who would you like personally, you know, to actually take lead?
For me personally, I would have loved a situation where, you know, we don't have to resort to zoning and actually look for a charismatic leader for the Senate, because the kind of presidency that we have, I feel that a robust National Assembly will help the polity better. So to that extent, I would have preferred a very charismatic leader, a very, if you like, knowledgeable leader. It's I don't find those you know,
qualities,
characteristics in
any
Lawan.
Of the...
I don't see it in Lawan. I don't see it in Ndume. I don't see it in Goje.
Because I was going to say in all three of them.
No. Okay. They are all at the back of the pack. They cannot give us what we want. So we need somebody that is much more, you know, intense in lobbying, much more intense in arguing a case. All of these people are likely to be robust.
But looking at the, you know, political scene in general,
yes,
who, and based on some of the qualities that you've mentioned, who do you think is likely to fit your bill?
Well, if you ask me, I would feel that the zoning is the problem in this arrangement.
Okay.
You know, so for
what
for
I mean
that,
is, if you had any...
No, I understood.
Okay.
I understand your question.
Okay.
But I'm just trying to give you a background. Understanding of my mindset regarding this issue.
Okay. All right.
So ordinarily, I would have wanted someone maybe from southern Nigeria.
Okay.
The reality is that they went to school better. They are more exposed. That's the reality. Most of them probably that went to university, they scored maybe 200, 300 at their jam. Not those who had 12% and for some reason. So it's just a straightforward thing. I would have preferred someone from southern Nigeria to really give us a robust National Assembly.
I wish we had time to really go into it, because you mentioning the South, you know, brings in a different context into it altogether. But let's, because of time, move on.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got the Nation newspaper. The Nation newspaper, we've got a number of stories and headlines. The major headline at the bottom of the Nation newspaper is Buhari mobilizes governors for Lawan and Gbajabiamila. Underneath that, a couple of riders, Southwest APC governors and reps elect meet. And also underneath that, we've got battle for 9th Assembly heads shift to regions. Okay, on the right-hand side at the bottom of the Nation newspaper, we've got CBN to withdraw 7.9 trillion naira dirty, mutilated notes. And at the very bottom of the Nation newspaper, we've got court verdict, 2 Osun West constituents seek Adeleke's sack. That story is on page 10. Okay, let's look at the top of the Nation newspaper. We've got in the top left-hand corner, Miyetti Allah's chief knocked over Tinubu. That story is on page 8. Underneath that, we've got wage Makinde kicks as Ajimobi meets NLC. That story is also on page 10. And to the right-hand side of the Nation, in the top right-hand corner, we have a number of headlines there as well. EFCC charges Bauchi governor-elect, page 7, $29.3 billion is lost yearly to erratic power, page 19. And a number of other headlines are at the bottom of that top right-hand corner story lineup. Okay, so let's look at this. Buhari mobilizes governors for Lawan, Gbajabiamila. Okay, we've already talked about that,
yes,
a little bit of that, you know, so I just wanted you to still touch a little on before we move on to something else.
It's still back to the standard run of play, the way we have always had our politics in Nigeria. You know, under Obasanjo's time, the governors were very powerful. They determined who became what and all of that. Apparently, Buhari is going back to that order again. Ordinarily, the governors really don't have any role to play, but as lobbyists, as influencers, perhaps they could talk to their state assemblymen, those who emerge from their states, that look, fall in line, support this person and all of that. If they toe their line, good for them.
Okay.
But if they don't.
Okay, so there are two other storylines that I want to touch on. I hope we do have enough time to be able to look into the two of them. If not, we'll move on to our next newspaper. But I wanted to touch on this. CBN to withdraw 7.9 trillion naira dirty, mutilated notes. And I wanted to touch on that because this is something that affects everyone. A lot of people are rejecting dirty notes.
Yes.
And then, so I wanted to get your take and initial reaction.
My take is very straightforward. The country is faulty. And these are the small evidences that show clearly that we don't seem to have direction. What is it about mutilated notes? When I joined the bank in UBA many years back as a clerk, one of the first jobs I did was sorting of currency. You sort dirty notes, mutilated notes from those ones that can still go back in circulation. And of course, all of that will end up in CBN. And I just wonder what is going on these days. The kind of currency that we have, most people at some point have to give out their change because they don't want to get infected by the terrible state of the mutilated notes. It is simply alarming that you have a system that cannot run efficiently, properly. It's a cycle. We must build cycles within most of the things that we do in this country. For instance, the ecosystem. We know that there will be rainy season at so and so time, so we can predict. So if you build a system within your currency, how all of this is distributed and how it comes back to CBN. For goodness sake, what is my business with mutilated notes? It is simply shameful. Simply shameful.
But do you not think this is a good thing that the CBN is doing?
After how many years?
But at least it's doing something.
If they leave me to run government in 1 month, believe you me, this country will be turned inside out, upside down, because it's just crazy. Now, it doesn't require all this long story. It's supposed to be a normal thing, for goodness sake.
Okay, because one of the things that you mentioned is that there's supposed to be a cycle. So how long do you think
it is how the system runs?
Okay.
You see, if you put out currency, for instance, the smaller denominations, their life cycle will definitely be shorter than the bigger denominations, if you understand what I mean.
Yes.
Because these are the ones that go, for exchange all of the time. Transactions.
What I really want to clarify from you is that let's look at the lower denominations now.
Okay.
What's the cycle, technically speaking? Like, how long should it?
Technically speaking, with this, what do you call it now? This BVN and cashless society of a thing, the life cycle will now be extended. But ordinarily, there is no year that you shouldn't print new notes. Every year you must print new notes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Is it not because of all of these things that we came up with polymer and all of that?
Yes,
it's just a joke. It's just a joke.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to our next newspaper now. We've got the Vanguard. The Vanguard newspaper, the major headline on the Vanguard newspaper is economy bleeds as power system collapses. Generation drops to 2,039 megawatts. Homes, factories suffer outages. NGC, TCN yet to complete maintenance of the Escravos Lagos pipeline. Okay, that's the major headline there. Underneath that, on the left-hand side, we've got federal government's new payroll system dubious, ASU says. That story is on page 11. And underneath that, we've got I have no regrets joining APC. That's Senator Akpabio. That story is on page 41. At the bottom of the Vanguard newspapers, we've got just in the middle on the... In fact, let me go to the far right. Labour issues in Ngige May 1 ultimatum on NSITF board. That story is on page 9. We've seen that story on some of the other newspapers as well. Okay, at the bottom of the Vanguard, we've got new cabinet, hope rises for Enang as Akpabio opts for National Assembly, page 8. And then we're back to Nadeko days, Bokno Akerele, page 28. Serap writes Dixon, ask him to reject life pension for Bayelsa lawmakers. That story is on page 12. Let's look at the top of the Vanguard. We've got UTME in the middle at the top. We've got, we've uncovered new scam to defraud candidates, says JAMB. That story is on page 8. And to the left-hand side of that story, we've got insurance claims rise faster than premium income. And to the right-hand side of the Vanguard, in the top right-hand corner, we've got EFCC arraigns Bauchi governor-elect for alleged bribe taking today, and Ekiti Oba returns 6 months after abdicating throne. That story is on page 11. Okay, before I ask you which story you would like to touch on, let's quickly look at the headline. Economy bleeds as power system collapses. I like this kind of headlines because they affect the everyday you and I. So let's quickly touch on that.
Power has been a challenge since when I was a little boy, coming out at night to take fresh air. It is surprising that several decades after, we're still here. And again, it is also surprising that the man who said no serious government, should be able to, should be having the challenge of power after 6 months. That is not rocket science. But almost 4 years down the line, look at where we are. It's just a disgrace. As far as I'm concerned, he has no business. The minister has no business in that ministry. That is my opinion. Wow. That is in the first instance. Then, like everything else in Nigeria, you see, everywhere is just bleeding. It's just bleeding. And clearly, it shows that we don't have leadership, because that is precisely what will make the difference. Because if you manage power properly, by that I mean whether it is 1,000 megawatts, whether it is 5,000 megawatts, we're talking of effective use of power. We won't all be crying the way we're crying, but you can see that the whole thing is just haphazard, it's just nasty. This week is like there's improvement. 3 weeks thereafter is like...
So it's 2 steps forward and more steps backward.
Yeah, 10 steps backwards. It's just a disgrace. If they give me a chance, man, some of these people, it's not just that you face trial, but man, let me not just say, but it's a disgrace. It's just unfortunate.
How do you feel then when we look at neighboring countries and how they handle their own power? What's your take on that?
Well, to be fair to Nigeria, so to say, it's about size. Because if you stay in one room, chances are what you're going to use, although it also depends on what is inside of that one room, what you're going to use is not likely to be up to what a man who stays in a duplex will be using. So Nigeria is big and all of that. But again, you ask yourself, what are we really doing with the power? How many of the industries are running? In Bayelsa, there is no industry, short and simple, yet there is no light. And you ask yourself, why? It's just crazy. The neighboring countries, they are not as big as Nigeria. So to some extent, if they have 3,000 megawatts, it could be fair enough for them. Okay. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So for Nigeria, we can make the excuse that we're big. It's just that we are not running our power system effectively and efficiently. That, I think, is where the problem lies. Okay.
All right. So on to one of the major headlines once again that you would like to touch on. There are a number of the ones at the top here.
Just shoot, whatever.
All right, let's talk about UTME. We've uncovered a new scam to defraud candidates, JAMB says. What's your take about that?
There are so many scams in Nigeria. For instance, you walk along the road and you see vacancy, written with a pen, sometimes with chalk on the wall. And surprisingly, people go for such, if you like, employment scams. So many years ago, I told a neighbor of mine, anywhere you see a vacancy that is not properly documented, you have no business going there. That is on the one hand. You see, because our law enforcement, too, doesn't take time to smoke out some of these petty scammers, that is why we have scamming at a larger scale with UTME. The whole system is fraught with decayed mindset, the corruption, because people want to survive. Now that we're going to 30,000 naira minimum wage, we're going to have more of these scammings because people are looking for ways by which they can, square up with the inflationary trend that will follow. Okay. But the intelligence people need to work. They need to work.
All right then, Martins, thank you very much. We're going to leave it there because of time.
No problem.
Thank you very much indeed. We've been listening to Martins Lomba, a public affairs analyst, and that's how we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much once again. We're wrapping up right here, right now on Off the Press. We're back tomorrow, same time, 8:30 precisely, when we're going to be back with another edition of Off the Press, when we'll be bringing you all of the major headlines from all of the national dailies. Until then, I remain Tokunbo Taiwo saying good morning.